some of you have given up time with loved ones, friends. You've left your home. You've traveled some distance. Why are you here? I never heard this gentleman before Deke asked me to do this. Deke and I have known each other for a quarter of a century. He was amazing. And you know the stories about him better than I do. Thank you. You know the stories about him better than I do. And being at dinner with folks last night, listening to those stories and watching you, just filled my heart. I can't tell you how much I took away a lot from reading the book. But what you gave me last night was all that put to life. The creativity in you, the stories you've held on to, what's important to you, what you share with each other, who you are. You're unique and distinct, and there's never going to be another you, ever. And what are you going to do with that? You've got unique characteristics and qualities. He knew that. It was amazing how humble he was about it, but he knew that about himself. Over 500 patents. That's amazing. Okay, some of them were questioned. And the work you did putting things together so that we would know, you've left me a changed person. And I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for having met all of you. I'm different for that. I'll be different when I get back home. I think I have a new appreciation for the fact that there are things for me to do I don't yet know, but I have unique qualities. I need to use them, and I need to use them to make the world better. There are lots of things going on I don't care for. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Thank you for what you have given up to be here. Thank you for what you've given to be here, and we'll continue on. I have the revised order of proceedings that we're using. Okay. Robert, you're on, sir.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you again. We're also extremely pleased to have the Honourable Steve Roden, the President of TIMOL, here this morning to make a brief address, and also Commander Richard McHugh, Royal Navy, from the British Embassy in Washington, DC, who's the Assistant Naval Attaché. So, sir, I welcome you also, and thank you for attending. William Kennish was a modest son of a simple Manx farmer. William had flair, enthusiasm and talents that took him from the friendly environs of Ramsey, Isle of Man, to many parts of the world as he developed his career within the British Royal Navy. Whilst on the American station in 1828, he developed his marine theodolite with its gun quoin and breast pieces, which became his first centralised gun command system. Once set, the commander, standing on a poop deck, had only to sharply draw upon some lanyards for bells to ring out on each deck with the guns, and the guns would then fire in unison. Today that theodolite has become radar. The quoin and breast pieces have become hydraulic actuators for elevation and azimuth, and the gun commander now sits secure deep within the ship with key members of his crew surrounding him. 189 years may have passed, but William's invention can still be recognised in every modern warship afloat today. 3 British admirals recognised William's talents, and he served on their flagships during his career, which, like many mariners of the time, was dogged by challenges of both injury and opportunity. William responded by writing poetry in those quiet night watches which uniquely recorded the tradition and superstitions of his era in his home island, a legacy of poetry which is increasingly valued today. William's enthusiasm for the technology of his age, engineering, steam and hydraulics, were unbounded as he tried many times to share his ideas enthusiastically with his contemporaries and seniors, sadly unsuccessfully too often than not. But this determination to innovate almost bankrupted him more than once, and eventually he decided to seek his future career in that land across the Atlantic which he had seen before only from a flagship, but now had decided to take up residence within the United States of America. Few men could have made more impact so quickly in their newly adopted home than did William. Within a year, he had invented new valve control gear for a hydraulic engine, sold the patent for it, and paid for his family to join him, sailing in relative luxury from Liverpool. Immediately after that, he demonstrated the new diving bell to the technical leaders of the US Navy in Brooklyn Navy Yard, and this was widely reported in a number of newspapers in great detail. This was then followed by his involvement with the Hope Association of New York, and then with the very well-regarded financier, Mr. Frederick Kelly. This led to multiple transits of New Granada, now known as Colombia, the region, and Panama, first seeking out a gold mine in New Granada, and then exploring routes for an interoceanic canal which could link the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. William did this whilst demonstrating that the Pacific and Atlantic were at the same average tidal level, for at the time it was feared that any canal which linked the two oceans together would actually empty the Pacific into a lower Atlantic. Reported by the German explorer Baron Alexander von Humboldt as an able engineer, William was endorsed by the Congress of President James Buchanan's government with a $25,000 expedition in 1858. In today's terms, that's about $600,000, to verify the Atrato and Taranto river route for Williams Canal, and that report was presented to Congress in 1861. Many years later, at a banquet of honour for the opening of the Panama Canal, where the French canal engineer de Lesseps was the guest of honour, William was mentioned as an influence of the final position of the Panama Canal. The multiple expeditions into the hostile New Granadian country took a severe toll on William Kennish's constitution, and despite returning to Brooklyn for the last years of the 1850s, he only survived until March 19, 1862, 155 years today, where he unfortunately passed away with typhoid pneumonia. Due to the nature of that illness, William's remains were held in a retaining tube quite close by where we are sitting now. And in that period, his wife Mary had to sell their family plot here at Greenwood to pay for passage back to England to allow her to settle her brother's estates, as he had also died only weeks after William. William was finally laid to rest here in March 1869 at the location we shall shortly be visiting. In conclusion, I'm sure everybody here must have asked themselves at some point, what was William really like? But without any real expectation of knowing. Well, only last week I came across a newspaper article published in June 1862 lamenting William's death, where he was described as known to many for his amiable manners, gentle nature, recognised as a brave man and an accomplished sailor. Those compliments were made by Mr. Henry William Cubbin, a prominent Manx businessman at the time who lived in Onken. So to everyone gathered here, I pass on the sincere thanks of the William Kennish Memorial Trust. That's Roy Moore, Dana Kennish-Smith, who's helped us here in the USA, and myself, because without your support and those of many others, we could not have been able to place a £350 piece of Manx granite from Doon Quarry on William's final resting place and for the transportation across the Atlantic. So in conclusion, I would thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Last Monday, I took a trip of about 5 miles from where I live in the Isle of Man over to Corrinie in Mackhold. It was a beautiful sunny spring day, much like today, but without the snow. And it is a part of the island that I had the privilege of representing in Tynwald in the constituency of Garth for over 20 years. I passed Dun School, the Green Hills, South Barrule on the left, the sheep grazing, daffodils, a scene that would have been familiar to William Kennish, whose birthplace it was at Corrinie Bridge, at Corney Farm. Not much has really changed over the years. The Isle of Man has progressed, of course, but the beauty of the countryside, which so inspired William Kennish in his poetry, is there for us all to see. It was at this spot in 2012 that I first met Bob Stimson, who, in his typical dedicated and thorough way, had organised the ceremony for the placing of a plaque at Corrinie Bridge to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the death of William Kennish. And it was only about that time that I, like many, sorry to say, did we first really appreciate who William Kennish was, had been, and what he represented. Many of us had vaguely heard of William Kennish, but we knew that he lived in the early part of the 19th century, but didn't really know much about him. He was a hero unsung in his own land. That he is now better known is thanks really to the research and the work of Bob Stimson, for whom the life and work of William Kennish has become a labour of love. For many years, Bob, who is something of a historian, an engineer and inventor himself, and with patents to his name, like William, it was his 2011 book on the life of William that brought the man to life and to better public recognition, and unquestionably a work that did his subject justice. It was the product of years of research by Bob at such places as the National Archives in Kew, British Library, the National Maritime Museum, the Royal Society of Arts. And as an adopted Manxman, I was delighted to learn more about William's tremendous career from that book, and to develop a greater appreciation and respect for this inventive and enthusiastic Manxman. One can only imagine the pressures that, like so many Manxmen had in the 19th century, privation, financial circumstances that William faced at the time, that caused him to ultimately emigrate and settle in America. But it is thanks to William that we, as his admirers and his descendants, many of you are his descendants, are gathered today, united in respect for this Manxman who found fulfillment and achieved his ambitions thanks to the dynamic meritocracy which was the United States of the 19th century. This great nation benefited from the inventive work. Its navy benefited from the inventions of William. the Panama Canal, as we know, the first route practically was discovered, brought to notice by William. And it is William's family living on these shores who became citizens in this democracy and who worked on such things as the Statue of Liberty and Brooklyn Bridge, not very far from here, that we must give thanks to this great Manxman. On Friday, I called in at the Isle of Man College Engineering Centre, William Kennish Centre, which was opened in November 2014, which Dec attended, and Roy, and also Cliff Kennish and his wife, who were over as well at that time. And I am pleased to report that it is thriving. And the entrance lobby has the added benefit of not only the diagrams of William's inventions, the marine theodolite and other complicated sounding devices, but a facsimile of the 1811 apprenticeship deed, which was in the possession of Jennifer, and who kindly made it available for copying to Bob, and it now hangs in the William Kennish Centre. And it was his apprenticeship for 7 years from the age of 12 when he developed the skills of master carpentry for the Royal Navy, and his inventive streak that was allowed to develop thereafter. Just thanks to that apprenticeship, of which we see evidence today, that William's life is also better known. There is also another new plaque at the colony by the side of the road, which motorists can see, so nobody is in any doubt that this was the home of William Kennish, 1799 to 1862, Manx explorer, inventor, poet, and engineer. And it is fitting, therefore, today that as we meet, something of his homeland has been brought to Brooklyn from Dun Quarry, a lump of Manx granite, third of a ton, I think, or quarter of a ton, inscribed with details of William's great legacy to us, and which we are to unveil in a moment or two. Brought here thanks to the efforts of the William Kennish Memorial Trust, which Bob and Dec and Roy and others got underway a couple of years ago, or a year or so ago. Terrific project, and I pay tribute to their efforts and to the members of the public, because like many great memorials of the 19th century, the cost of this was raised by public subscription and donations from you, his descendants and admirers, and from people in the Isle of Man, not least the children of Dun School, who have adopted their local man as a true local hero. It is a wonderful privilege on behalf of the people and the Parliament of the Isle of Man to have been invited here today, and I look forward to joining you as we pay further tribute to William Kennish later on this morning. Thank you.
I am a marine engineer, which means that when I'm at sea in ships, I manage the engineering department, responsible for making sure that the engines turn the propeller shafts, looking after the ship's hull, ensuring all our pumps for keeping water out of the ship are serviceable, producing fresh water to drink, and keeping the ventilation working. When we are preparing for battle, I ensure that all our firefighting systems are operating correctly, and I run the damage repair teams who repair the ship if we sustain any damage. As Master Carpenter, this is the role that William Kennish would have had if he were in today's Navy. Looking over William's career, I see that he had the opportunity to serve on some very famous ships of his day, particularly HMS Victory in 1838, where he must have been responsible for maintaining Nelson's flagship that he used at the Battle of Trafalgar. The great challenge that any Navy has is how to accurately direct its weapons fire. The Navy that does it best can maintain its warfighting edge over its competitors. Today, we look towards individuals to come up with new ideas as to how we can accurately achieve this. William did this with his theodolite to estimate the distance of a target, the chart for gunners to work out the angle of fire, and the wedges to move the guns into position. It is a remarkable achievement for a ship to be able to place accurately over 75% of its shots fired from a moving ship through a 6-foot square target, which is what William's ideas achieved. And as we have heard, today, fire control computers use these exact same principles to calculate the firing angle, distance, and then using computer networks, join together different weapon systems to accurately hit the target, all founded on William's ideas. As we know, this was not William's only idea. He also established how to move guns ashore from ships at sea, designed the first screw propeller, pneumatic sounding instruments, a hydrostatic diving mechanism, hydraulic ventilation, and the pneumatic tube. From a modern day's perspective, these are extraordinary achievements, pushing the boundaries of technology to develop many inventions that we take for granted today, such as the pneumatic tube and a bicycle tyre. Like many in the Navy today, William retired from the service after 20 years' service and started a second career. The theme throughout his second career seems to be using his extraordinary energy and intellect to continue to push the boundaries. And this is what took him to both New Granada and the Isthmus of Darien, modern-day Panama. There, as we know, is where he found the river Atrato, which linked the Pacific to the Atlantic and was a subsequent basis for the Panama Canal. So to come back to my original theme of providing a perspective of what William's achievements mean in the context of today, I see many of his qualities in today's Navy. His selflessness. He could quite easily have used his talents to make large sums of money, but instead he died without much. His focus on putting others first, such as looking after his seriously ill travelling companion whilst in the isthmus. Overcoming adversity and never giving up, illustrated on a number of times through his life, ranging from learning English on joining the Navy to rediscovering himself when he came to America. Finally, his ability to use original ideas to come up with solutions to everyday problems. There are also some very unique qualities, primarily how much he managed to cram so many achievements into his life. In my 20 years of being in the Navy, I have only achieved a fraction of what William achieved, before we even look at the book of poetry and his second career where he discovered the route of the Panama Canal. In the context of today, William Kennish is an extraordinary man, and one that should be rightfully remembered.